man who was hanged in the 1800s was given to a physician to study, only to be turned into a pair of shoes as well as several other objects. In this episode, we will find out if this is fact or fiction. The story begins in 1878 with a man by the name of George Parrott, who was also known by the name Big Nose George. He was part of a gang of horse thieves and road agents. One day they decided to rob a Union Pacific train by tampering with the train tracks in such a way that the train would derail if it hit the tracks. However, a work crew came along whilst the gang was hiding in the bushes waiting to pounce on the train. Some members of the gang wanted to attack this work crew because they knew that they would fix the train tracks and ruin their plan, but George and another member called Frank Toll objected, saying that they shouldn't kill the repairmen, as they are innocent and they are just there to fix the rail. In the end, the gang decided not to attack this work crew and watched as their plan became foiled. After this failed robbery, two officers went to check the surrounding area where the tracks had been disrupted to see if there was any sign of an ambush, to which themselves got killed by the gang, who was still there hiding. Deciding that this area was now too dangerous to stay in, the gang split up in various directions. This led to law enforcement offering a higher price for the capture of these men to $10,000. The next month, Frank Toll was killed whilst he was trying to rob the Black Hills stage lines. One of the first men to be apprehended by law enforcement went by the name Dutch Charlie. He was arrested but was stopped by a mob whilst he was on the train. He was taken shortly to a telephone pole where he was hung by the neck. Big George's fate would be much worse, however. In Montana, Big Nose George was bragging about the attempted train robbery when he got drunk. A telegram was immediately sent to a police officer about this, and George was put on the same train that his fellow gang member Dutch Charlie was on. He was about to meet the same fate as his friend until he pleaded to the crowd that he would tell them how he knew about the murders if they let him live. So he was taken down from the telephone pole and brought into court. In court, Big Nose George claimed that his fellow gang members Frank McKinney was actually Frank James, which led to people believing that the gang leader was actually Jesse James, who was one of the most infamous train robbers of all time. However, by the end of Big Nose George's trial, he was eventually found guilty on December the 15th, 1880, and was due to be hung on the 2nd of April the next year. This was until George decided to escape his cell and attacked one of the prison guards. He was eventually brought back into his cell by another guard who luckily had a pistol nearby to taunt George back into his cell. When the town heard of this news, they knew that they had had enough of Big Nose George, so they decided to break into the prison and try to hang him twice unsuccessfully. However, Big Nose George eventually succumbed to his fate during the third attempt. After Big Nose George died, his brain was sent to Thomas McGee, who was a doctor who wanted to see if a criminal's mind was different to that of an abiding citizen. Thomas originally cut up the body and firstly gave his assistant Lillian Heath the top part of the skull, which he ended up using as an ashtray, then a doorstop, and eventually a flower pot. The rest of Big Nose George was eventually put into a whiskey barrel with a salt solution, which would eventually be made into human skin shoes. Meanwhile, Big Nose George's face was turned into a death mask. Once Thomas was satisfied with the skin's feeling, he sent the skin off to a shoemaker, who he persisted on keeping the nipples of George on the shoes to show that this was in fact a human being, and that he could not be mistaken for wearing anything else. Thomas was often seen wearing these shoes once they had been completed. He was disappointed that the nipples had been removed, however, but he was still highly fond of them. He even wore them to his inauguration in Wyoming. You can still see these shoes today in the Carbon County Museum in Wyoming, which means that this case is in fact true. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've liked it, and I hope you all have a very nice evening. Good night.